Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the kickoff session of CMEPalooza Spring 2018. I am Scott Kober, the co-producer of CMEPalooza, and I would like to welcome you to our kickoff session of this two-day event. This session is called Not Another Outcomes Panel, or How We Learn to Stop Wearing and Love Bar Graphs. So before we start the session, as with all of our sessions, I want to thank our many sponsors of CMEPalooza, our gold sponsors, Genentech and ACHL, our silver sponsors, ASIM, Forefront Collaborative, Educational Measures, Medscape Education, and Peer Audience. And then our bronze sponsors, Catamount Medical Education, Clinical Care Options, CMEology, Creative Educational Concepts, Global Education Group, Helio.com Education Lab, Impact Education, Infograph Ed, PrimeEd, Primary Care Network, Real CME, RedMed Ed, REMI, Viator Medical Communications, and Vindico Medical Education. So during this and all CMEPalooza sessions, for those of you who are watching this live, there are 3 ways to ask questions. You can use the Educational Measures text line to send in a question. The number is 267-6660-CME or 0263. If you are watching this on our live page, you can click on the link for the Scott session. So the link is right here on the slide, but it's probably easier to just click it on the live page. Or you can tweet your question to us using the hashtag CMEPalooza. So I will be keeping tabs on all of these various mechanisms during this session. So if there are any questions that come in, we will be addressing them as they arrive. So a quick speaker disclosure slide, just to be mindful that the opinions, discussions, and conclusions expressed are those of the presenters and do not express an endorsement by or position of their employer, parent company, or affiliates. And with that, I am going to turn it over to the session moderator, Greg Salinas, the president of CE Outcomes, to get us started.
Thanks, Derek. Well,
Scott.
Scott, sorry. You got my name wrong. I'll get yours. All right, so let's go to, okay. So thank you all for joining us this morning. And I want to introduce the panel real quick. So we have Maria Deutsch from BMS. We have Karen Ruiz-Cordell from Regeneron, and we have John Ruggiero from Genentech. Today, we're going to be talking a bit about outcomes and just general from the supporter point of view about how their perceptions of outcomes are. So I asked, I sent out an email to all the email addresses I had last month, and just trying to get some questions from all of you about what are your more pressing concerns, or what are your pressing questions that you have for supporters about outcomes. So we're going to get started with that. And I'm going to start, let's start everybody off with an easy one here. So more just a general kind of submission question. So when submitting grant responses to RFPs, and you think you might be able to reach level 6, but you're sure of level 5, how should this be stated when most online submissions allow only one number? And I'm going to start with Maria on this one. And we'll kind of go through and get everybody's opinions about this as we go. So Maria, what are you thinking about this one?
So about this one, we don't like when people overpromise or overestimate. So for something like this, I would be happy to see the 5, but if you came in with level 6 outcomes in the outcomes report, I would even be happier.
Great. Karen, John, anything to add to that? John? Or sorry.
Karen, why don't you go first?
Okay. So this actually kind of, I feel like this is a common thing, coming from off of the provider side and now being on the supporter side. And now on the supporter side, I will say, I think that you go with the number that you can definitely achieve, because we're certainly looking at that. So when, if level 6 is sort of what's written in your proposal, and you don't make it there, I would so much rather prefer to see level 5 solidly reached. And if level 6 occurs, as Maria said, that's one. But I think that you go with the sort of the level that you can absolutely reach, because I'd rather have a solid outcomes report.
Yeah, Greg, maybe just to add to what Maria and Karen already said, which I agree with. perhaps maybe submit what you think is what the RFP is asking for. And if you don't believe that you can achieve what the RFP is asking for, do a real good self-reflection on whether or not your educational program, your institution has all the appropriate pieces in place to be able to meet the RFP. I think as a supporter, I would rather spend my time thinking less about levels, thinking more about gaps, thinking about the problems that solve those gaps, and reading through submissions that really address those problems rather than trying to magnify an imaginary level. And I mean that with all positivity. So
That's
I think
a good,
really focusing on the RFP.
that's a good point, John, because it made me think, sometimes, and you guys know as well as anyone, but, sometimes education should be, or RFP might be geared for a certain kind of threshold of education. For instance, if it's on some new and emerging treatments, you really wouldn't want level 6 because it probably wouldn't be that meaningful to you. What are you really showing out of a patient level if you're really just trying to impart knowledge at this point? So I think, your point to stick to the RFP and what it's asking for might be a good place to start anyway. Would that be right?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. All right, so thank you. Let's go on to the next question. We're going to get a little deeper here. So here we go. What information is useless to you? So as most providers know that they get a lot of data. So, and analyzing everything might give you such a big report that it just becomes overwhelming. So what information do you typically get in reports you just don't even look at anymore? Let's start with Karen.
Oh, my heart on this question, because I have to say that it's the very granular data, which, again, on the provider side was so valuable to me. And now I understand, that from a supporter view, it's a much different view, right? We're sort of a cog in a much larger machine. And so, looking at granular data just is not, it is the least useful. It is really about the aggregate and the overall and the takeaway and the impact.
So when you talk about granular data, Karen, what are you really talking about there?
Probably response level by cohort, broken, you can get very granular, obviously, but, item level and even beyond.
Okay. John, anything else there? What information do you really not want?
I completely agree with Karen. So Karen has talked about this till the cows have come home. She knows full well that I have a love and respect for biostatistics. I was trained in that. I had epidemiological training as well. I had education training. I try so hard to marry all of that into a passion that I think we are all really eager to display. Being in our industry, we're all very passionate about this. It really comes down to the following. Every bit of information that a provider provides to us is useful in some kind of way. Having been a former provider, the contribution that providers give to us is so amazing. We are only as good as the provided education that we support, and thank goodness we have that available to us. But we have about 3 to 10 minutes with any given medical leadership or medical team to try to demonstrate the value of what was provided. And if we don't have high-level information that shows impact and shows elevation of evidence and faster application of evidence in a fair, balanced way, if we don't have the message points that are going to resonate in the language that they speak, they don't speak levels. We shouldn't be teaching them about levels. We should be teaching them about impact. We're going to read them. So high-level message points is really what's important, in addition to allowing us to read, report details that are always useful to the individuals on the medical education team.
Great, Maria.
I don't have anything else to add. What we're looking for is information that's useful to our internal stakeholders, and too much of this information, as mentioned, it's not useful to us.
Well, that takes us right into our next question then. So when we talk about go ahead, Scott.
let me unmute myself first. We have a couple questions that have come in. So I think this first one is related to the first topic you were talking about. So do the other supporters, I'm not sure which of you mentioned this, also take into account the proposed educational format when looking at the anticipated educational outcome?
So do the supporters look at format when thinking about outcomes? All right, Karen, anything? That's kind of a. I'm not really sure how to answer that question myself. I don't know.
No, I'm going to answer it how I think they mean. So I guess that means live versus enduring.
That's how I took it, Karen.
Yeah. So it is collecting data.
It's annoying.
I'm getting a little bit of feedback.
I hear it.
Yeah, I think we are too.
Let's answer.
I can jump in, Maria, unless you would like to.
You go, John.
Okay, just very simply, yes, I believe speaking on behalf of my team, but my team is not present today. So I apologize to them if I'm wrong here. I think that would be very important. I think it really goes back to the first question about what is written in the RFP. If you think you're instilling practice change, but you're not there working with them to do practice change observation, or your objectives aren't even practice driven, yeah, I think that weighs in on the decision. And educator specialists in the provider community, we have full faith will select the appropriate format, the appropriate objective, the appropriate measure to show that the impact is being made. We have to rely on the confidence we have in you to help us show the impact that you're trying to make. And so I think everything is all part of the same puzzle. Measure and format so closely tied together. Maria, sorry I went too long.
No, you didn't go. You didn't go long at all. What we also see in grants, and I'm getting that feedback too, is some of the providers define levels 4, 5, and 6 much differently than what we define level 4, 5, and 6. And what we get back in a report, also the same. If they promised us level 5 and we look at them, they clearly look like level 4. So that seems to be a disconnect as well.
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw that in there.
I completely agree with Maria that is a major issue and really goes to the heart of this presentation, right? I mean, we really need to talk about standardizing terms across.
So the other question we have, and I think you addressed this to some degree, this is to the second question you guys were talking about, is instead of presenting all the granular data, should the meaning of that granular data be what is shared instead of all the numbers, kind of pages and pages of statistics?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. I think that's pretty clear. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so we've kind of started with what information is useless, but maybe we should move on to what's most valuable. So here's the question: if you only get 3 facts, what are the most valuable? And let's start back with Maria again.
So 3 facts. I guess it would go back to knowledge increase, confidence, and competence. We actually created a template here, an infographic template here, so we could use and present to our internal stakeholders. And part of the infographic includes just what I mentioned, as well as a breakdown of the demographics and gaps. We also want to know what the 3 most common gaps are still occurring after an activity. And I'm getting very bad feedback, so somebody else take it.
Maria, I completely agree. I think that knowledge increase, confidence, competence, all really important, especially if you're in an area of emerging information and you are trying to ensure that the good clinicians out there are up to date on all the details that they need to have in order to manage patient care. at the appropriate levels of what's expected. I might want to suggest too that we're at a different time right now where the clinical decision making is not happening at an individual level, but at the system level, and the system is very, very concerned about meeting the triple aim, and the triple aim, which happens to have 3 points in it as well, Greg, is improving the patient care experience, improving the health of their populations, and then reducing per capita cost of healthcare for their populations. If education is going to be an agent of change, it's one thing to say, yeah, we made more people informed, we allowed more people to be informed about a specific emerging area of need. But if they're the individual and the entire system wasn't educated on this, how much will that continue to resonate within the system that they're employed? And so how can you use education as an agent of change to show that evidence is having faster throughput through the system and having an impact on what's keeping the system up at night, which is those points within the triple aim? That, I think, would really resonate with a medical team that I might have to report to. It's speaking their language, and it's helping them see that the evidence that they're really producing and that they care about is being balanced with all the other evidence that they're facing.
And I absolutely agree.
Why is John the only one that's not getting the negative feedback?
I'll just try to work through it.
I'm just going to blame John, and he's the only one who sabotaged us all. All right, so let's go. I think the next question is pretty similar. So, again, what do you value the most? I think we covered that. We can certainly come back to that. But let's go. Let's talk again. Let's go to the next one. So, in general, are there any outstanding items missing from outcomes reports? And let's start there, and then we might go more to the upper management, which I think kind of goes back to that value thing again. Karen, anything that you see just generally missing when you're looking at outcomes reports right now?
Honestly, it's connecting the dots. I mean, it's getting out of, and I think, John, you kind of touched on this. It's getting out of this Moore's levels language and really connecting the outcomes to meaningful changes, whether it's, a system level or it is your learning objectives, whatever it is, it's connecting the dots in a meaningful way. And then also thinking past that one program, thinking in a way, building on the learning, looking at trends. That to me, I mean, that answers both of these questions, right? Because not only do I feel like sometimes it's missing, but upper management, internal stakeholders, that's the heart, that's the meat, that's what they want.
So that's a good point. And I think sometimes I agree with you. I see some of that too, is that, you've got your level 1 and 2 in a bucket, and then you got your level 3 in a bucket. I'm still using the word levels, but there's no, okay, so this knowledge change, how did that change competence, or how did that work with any kind of higher level outcomes measurement?
Right.
What is that through line? And I think that's a good point. Maria, anything to add there?
Well, what we ask of our providers is to supply us with 2 to 3 or 2 to 4 slides up front of an executive summary. So what they have come to the conclusion of, what they have drawn out as a specific and important piece of information that I could use and present. And we're finding that these executive summary points are not in these reports that we're asking for. Sure, we can go through and we could look, but if they have, they have an outcomes department and an outcomes analyst, I'm expecting those excellent results to be right there for me to be able to review and use.
John?
I really like what Maria said, and also what Karen said too, but what I meant by that was I really like the recommendation that Maria just gave us. I know it's really difficult to standardize an outcomes process that is anything but standard, but if there's anything that we can agree to, I don't think it's that difficult from a compliance level or even from a legal perspective of different organizations to kind of say, hey, you know, as a provider community and as a supporter community, we accept an executive summary before your outcomes report. I mean, that's a really simple practice for us to maybe all adopt. I think just going back to your question, Greg, you know, maybe just reiterating what I said in the beginning, while we're very valuable as a team within industry, every function within industry in a given medical team setting, 5 minutes, 10 minutes maybe max of time to present what they're doing at any given time. And what senior leadership is really interested in is to seeing where impact has been being made. I don't know, actually I do know, whenever we review grants with a grant review committee or a medical team, they're interested in the objectives. They're confident that we're making the right choices because we're confident in those who we're choosing. We're confident in the educational design. We have experience in that. We look at behavior change theories as well, and those practices. Never has anybody across our medical team, and this is no disrespect to anyone, but never has anybody in our medical team ever spoken the language of levels. They don't understand it. It doesn't resonate with them. What resonates with them is the objective and the goal and the impact in the end. That is what's really useful to us. That's what catches their attention.
One interesting thing that I think, you know, and Karen mentioned is that you know, the education doesn't happen in a bubble. You know, we all know that physicians don't just go to one thing and then that's it for their year in a particular therapeutic area. So I think the idea of thinking broader, thinking how does your education fit in the global education community, you know, that might be very useful, I would think. Scott, yes, let's see if you've got some more questions.
A couple of questions. So here's one that just came in through our educational measures Google voice line or Google text line. So this is what they said. The benchmarking survey showed that many providers are starting to make the linkage between needs assessment and outcomes. Are there any provider types who are necessarily doing this better than others?
Maria, or John, go ahead.
I'm sorry, are we being asked for like specific names, or are we talking?
I know, that's what I was
that's a hard question.
Well, I think that's what I said, provider type.
Yeah,
Okay,
characteristics of those companies, yeah.
Okay.
Things that they're thinking about perhaps that other people aren't, or yeah.
It's an interesting question. I think a valuable question. I don't know if I know the answer immediately to that. Karen, Maria, do you have any thoughts about that?
Here at Bristol Myers Squibb, what we have been doing over the past year and a half, we've been looking for grants that are a little bit more innovative than the usual. We want to be able to allow the learner to learn in the best way possible. So sometimes that's just not the presentation in the front of the room. Sometimes it's more interactive. For an example, we supported a virtual reality activity and full-blown goggles and everything, and we got really great feedback on it. It was something different, right? And so even internally, we made them know about it. We brought the company in and they actually did a demonstration. So things like that, innovative-wise, kind of puts that, you know, goes to the next level, if I answered the correct question correctly.
I would agree. And I would also say that, you know, it's a balance though, right? Because you need to have innovation with, you know, grounding. You need to have innovation with good, solid metrics as well. And I think that is sometimes challenging. You want to, you know, not just look for the bright and shiny thing, but, you know, at the same time, I know you're absolutely right. You know, you want innovation. So I think that it's also about striking a balance. Well,
yeah, I like those responses, Greg. My one concern is this thought, and maybe this wasn't what was meant in the question, but this thought that linking a needs assessment to outcomes measures is something new. I mean, if that's new, oof, I mean, what have we been spending our money on for all these years? But I respect that that's probably not what was meant. I think that maybe to what Karen had said was this balance and this level of innovation. I think we just kind of have to understand that we're in new times right now, and every industry, not just the healthcare industry, not just the educational industry, every industry is going through disruption right now. And when you're in the midst of disruption, predictability is always calming. And the more that you can predict success, the better off you are in your industry. And I think that when you think about education in this new marketplace, not everybody can do anything alone. We are all better when we're leveraging the skill sets that we each have. If you're partnering with a health system because you need data to show that there's true application of the evidence and practice changes happening, do it, don't fight it. If you're a health system and you don't have the outcomes expertise and the educational design expertise, and you need to partner with a medical education company to help you do that, do it. Don't fight it. I mean, we're not in a world anymore where we can do this solo. And the same thing for supporters. I mean, the more we can multi-support without getting bogged down by the complexities of, oh, I have this RFP here and I have this RFP here and I'm doing this time. The more we can just collectively do things together, we will be more valuable for the people who are on the receiving end of our education. I hope that that was the best answer I can get to that really good question.
It was a good answer. I don't even know if it answered the question, but it was a good answer.
Thanks. So going back to the question, and I want to kind of throw it around a little differently. So, they talked about needs assessments going to outcomes, but how often do you see, outcomes assessments being used in needs assessments? Is that common, or would you like to see more of that? Karen?
I definitely see it. We see that. And I do like that because of exactly what I said before, right? This is, you are leveraging think of the vast amount of data that you have access to as a provider. So you're leveraging that in a meaningful way, and you're building off of trends that you're measuring, program over program, year over year. So yes, I think we see that pretty often, and I do like that.
So this person is sort of trying to have a conversation through our educational measures text line. So I guess their comment to you, John, is it's not that this is a new skill. It's just that this person is wondering if providers are improving on their ability to link the needs assessment to outcomes reports over the last few years.
I got it. I apologize. I think yes. Yes. I think the provider community is fantastic. I really do. And to Karen's point, a continuous learning environment is always welcome. Always welcome. I mean, it's just thank you for the clarification. Whoever answered that question or asked that question, it's a good one.
Okay. I'll let you get back to your slides. We have a couple other comments, but I'll kind of hold some of them because I know that you guys have a bunch of other things that you guys want to get through.
Sure. So, okay, now we're going to get a little bit more granular. And so how much do p-values really matter as you look at outcomes data? It's becoming kind of a hot topic lately. And what statistics do you really find compelling, if any? So I guess let's start with Maria on this one. How much do you really look at those type of statistics?
We do. We ask that p-values are included in the outcomes reports, especially for the pre and post tests, so you can measure the statistically significant change. We also look for N values. That seems to be missing a lot in the outcomes. So we're looking for that as well. With regards to any other stats, that comes late, like Karen had mentioned, is just a lot of information, but we are looking for the basics, the p-value and the N's.
Karen?
So there was recently an article in JAMA and JAMA about, changing the threshold of a p-value to 0.005. And I think that should be very concerning in education, right? Because we're measuring and we're looking at behavior and educational improvement in the real world, as you pointed out, Greg. And so, achieving that level of significance is actually can be quite difficult. And inherently, there are problems with p-values, right? Because they're so vulnerable to a large sample size. So obviously, if you have a large sample size and you have even a minimal improvement from pre-test to post-test, you're still going to achieve an acceptable p-value. And that brings me to the next question, which is, I do like to see a combination of statistics. So looking at effect size, which is what effect do you have on this population that you're measuring right now? Also, even Bayesian modeling, which is more advanced and getting into more of the predictive modeling and advanced analytics. I think that we lean maybe a little too much on p-values. And now on the other end, I'll also say, it's okay if you don't achieve a p-value, because maybe it was a live event and you didn't have a large sample size. So again, I think that it's to put everything on just one statistical measurement is. I think we can't do that. I think it's a mistake.
We're gonna get a little deeper in this, John. Let's get some your initial thoughts with this one too.
Yeah, I don't disagree with my colleagues on this panel at all. Where I hope I'm not being too bold here is, I think that we're leaning a bit too much on science that is not necessarily part of our industry, meaning our educational industry. Can't believe I'm about to say what I'm saying here, because I am a biostatistician. And like I said, I love the science behind this. Education wasn't meant to be measured like a clinical trial. And I think that
right.
We have to rely less on trying to prove statistical formula and just think about what the gap was. If there is an increase in knowledge and that's vital to meet the gap, improving knowledge pre versus post through an assessment might be enough. We may not have to show that there's a statistical significance between the knowledge improvement, because, in reality, like I said, if you're improving knowledge with an individual, regression or predictability after that improvement may not even last anyway, because the entire system wasn't educated. So I just think you have to go back to what your focused gap was, present the information in a realistic way, so that we can interpret it in the language that the medical team understands, and then thereby show the value. Sometimes it's complex statistics, and sometimes it's really simple.
Thank you. Karen, going back to that article you mentioned in JAMA, I thought that an interesting conclusion the author made was, okay, so p-values aren't useful, so let's make it more strict and use this p-value instead. It didn't really seem to be a great interpretation as far as I'm concerned. And I guess that's the question I have, with this thought in that, when you take educational data up the ladders, to someone who's used to looking at clinical trial results, for instance, a medical director or someone, is it hard to convey that message that this isn't really the same thing as the typical data you see? John, any comments on that?
That, I think, is a perfect question. So now you can almost understand that there's a challenge that we all face as a supporter community, because sometimes we are speaking to people that expect clinical trial-like results. And so the community, supporters and providers alike, have been doing the best that they can to try to meet them halfway and help them understand, well, yeah, there is significance with this. I think it comes down to our message, and maybe that's another action item off of this this great webinar that you put together, Greg. Maybe the action item is, how do we get together and help amplify our message so that our individual leadership, either on the supporter side or the provider side, can understand that education is different. It's not scientific gathering of data. It's learning, continuous learning, change to a system, change to an individual. Karen and Maria are so much more eloquent at this kind of scientific stuff than I am. Seriously, they are.
Sure. Maria, do you want to pass it on? Or?
I think they would be able to help us maybe lead a conversation about that.
John hit on the very point as to why we ask for p-values. It's the senior leadership, because I'm in a medical organization, and they asked a few times, well, where's the p-value? So
Wow.
we put it in to satisfy them. So when they do see the outcomes, they go, oh, okay, I get it, because that's what they're used to. But I do agree with John, and I do agree with Karen, but this is what they're asking us to do.
Yeah, no, and I think to the simple point too, that Maria just provided, if that's what's working, then like, let's grab onto it. Let's understand it and understand how to interpret and understand how to speak to it. But if that's what's working, like, let's keep it working.
Karen, anything else to add?
Right. And yeah, Maria, I completely agree with you. It's funny because I'll use that, the presence of the p-value, or of not, reaching threshold of the p-value, to explain why this is not a controlled trial. This is education. This is behavior. We have to think of this differently. So you're absolutely right. We require the p-values because that's kind of the window in to educating our medical people as well. But I feel like I'm constantly saying it, because they're expecting, the education to behave just like a trial.
Exactly.
And there are times, even in our outcomes reports, where we're like, well, maybe 0.1 is okay. It's just trying to find that threshold too. Is like, where do you consider something significant? And maybe 0.05 isn't necessarily the standard for educational outcomes. So I think it just depends on the particular course and activity you're doing. All right, Scott.
Yeah, so I know you guys have a few more questions, but this one just came in. I thought that this was a good question. It's a little bit wordy, but I'll kind of read it as it came in. How do you balance promised outcomes with outcomes delivery timelines imposed by grant portals, when some of the outcomes take longer to realize than the allowed timeline to submit outcomes or reconciliations within those grant portals?
Maria, I think you probably can answer this one. I think you had some sort of background or slides around this.
Yeah, so we actually, as a team, created an outcomes guidance where we ask for interim reports 60 days after a live meeting and every 90 days after an enduring. The reason why and for that to be submitted until, of course, the year after it's been posted, the reason why we ask for these so often is because we actually use the information and we present to our medical teams. So they're actually asking, oh, didn't you have an AACR live meeting 2 weeks ago? What's the information? Can you give us an interim outcome? And then they'll ask me again a few months later, how's the enduring looking on that? Who the demographics? How many people are you educating? What was the impact on the number of patients? So as much as we're asking for the data, we're using the data. So we came up with those milestones for every 60 days for live, every 90 days for enduring.
I know that's specific to BMS, but Karen, John, do you have a similar threshold, or is it not as set in stone as that?
We do. Same, actually quite similar to Maria's schedule. So basically every 90 days, and we're very focused on probably 3 months, 6 months actually, but we follow all the way through, and my internal stakeholders are asking, and I give constant updates, which is also why we're adopting a executive summary template as well. So we're kind of aligning, I guess. Good.
I would agree.
John.
I would agree. I love Maria's and Karen's comments. The more that we can get data, the better off we are. And to Maria's point, yeah, absolutely. Every time we receive data, we use it. We put it in front of people. We talk about it. We have forums about it. Yeah, absolutely. I do respect the question too, that sometimes as things are getting more complex and we're really looking to change practice behavior, sometimes things take time. So how do we help satisfy you is how I'm reading into the question. How do we help satisfy you when things are taking time and we can't put a lot of data into your system or give it to you like we used to in the schedule you asked us to provide? And what I would just say, I mean, just speaking for our company, while we still have that schedule, whatever you can provide, even in preliminary kinds of fashions, is so helpful because it helps tell the story continuously with the team throughout the year.
Right, and I think, yeah, I think interim reports are pretty valuable there, just to give a snapshot of data as it is now. And, you know, for the provider or the outcomes person there, sometimes that's just a way to get it started. And so when you're doing your final report, it's almost done. You know, you really have a template you can work on.
And it also
right.
it also reinforces with our teams too, our internal teams, that again, learning is iterative. So we're stepping them through the process. It's not there's not a single outcome point. So I think it's important because of that as well.
It's a good point.
Great. So, all right, let's go to this question. That's you know, probably the biggest one that I often hear is, do you really read outcomes reports? All right, Karen, do you really read outcomes reports?
You can. I mean, of course I'm going to. Yes, I love outcomes.
She does. She's the outcomes queen.
Of course I do.
All right, John, do you think? Okay, let me rephrase this question. Do all outcomes reports get read?
I'm just going to answer no, even though that's not true. Yes, of course, everything that's put in front of us. Yes, completely. But go ahead.
Same question.
So we read them so much as that we actually send them back and point out errors that they make. That's how closely we read them.
Let's change this question just a little bit. So you know, you mentioned presenting data to upper management and different things like that. So what is most useful to you? You know, right now in outcomes reports, they used to be you know, you get a Word document or a PDF of that. Is that the most useful to you, or would you rather have it now in slides? Is that better?
Well, another requirement we have at BMS is slides, because it's in a format that's ready to be used. And the reason why we go through the outcomes reports really closely is because we want it to be where we can understand it and we could present it and answer any questions that come back. So they're always looking for PowerPoint here anyway. Send us your slides, send us your slide. So that's what we're asking the providers to send their outcomes reports in, that type of format.
Nothing further to add on my end. I completely agree with that 100%. Makes it very useful.
So
useful, it's just useful.
Yeah. Is it worth having a supplemental Word document that has like all the data in it, or is that not as useful to you? Would you look at that?
At the beginning, we thought it would be useful to us, but it's really not useful to us. We just don't have the time to go into the nitty-gritty. If we do have this particular question, we reach out and we get our answer. But for us, the PowerPoint is good enough with what we're looking for in there. And like I said, we have a guidance for outcomes. So it's not as useful to us, the Word doc. I don't know about for Karen or John.
So Greg, a question that came in that sort of kind of ties to this a little bit. I think this would be a good time to ask it. So what is the value of publishing outcomes reports then to the supporters? Do you kind of you know, look at any peer review publications, any posters that are generated based upon education you supported, and kind of how does that fit in the whole equation?
Sure, Karen, I think you might have a particular insight on that.
So for us, publishing and presenting abstracts, this is very important. And again, I think it's yet another moment where we can prove to these, you know, our very medical focused teams that yes, see, we too have value. We are producing meaningful data and publications that can kind of endure and have meaning in our entire community. So we absolutely track that. We encourage it. I always share it with my team, and it always generates a lot of internal discussion.
John, anything
Yeah, I spoke a little bit about speaking a medical team's language, speaking the language of our industry colleagues. There is great value when things get published or presented at meetings when you're on the supporter side of things. And I see pride in the eyes of the really amazing people that work with me in the team that I represent in Genentech when they support an educational activity that made its way because of the provider, made its way to an annual meeting, in a poster abstract, or in some publication. They feel like they were part of that, and they feel really good about the work that they're doing to support such great, fantastic work. We always encourage publication or abstract of outcomes and even designs and things that are just making everything better for the patients that it's serving. So I encourage every provider out there who's thinking about whether or not there are questions regarding publication as a final step, I'd encourage you to do it.
Same for you.
Yeah, I agree. You know, the provider that puts in that addition to a grant, that there's a possibility for publication, that's a plus. And that provider's grant will be brought to the next level, so to speak.
Great. All right, so let's go to the next question here on the slide. So, so do good outcomes reports make a difference between providers? Do you think about the history of someone's outcomes when making future decisions? Maria, let's go back to you. Let's start with you first.
I'm just so expressive. The answer is yes. So because we do rely on outcomes and we do value outcomes so much, the providers who do supply us with outcomes that are good and even great, we do think about that for future grants. How could you not? And it always makes us happy when we know that, oh, again, this provider is giving us great outcomes. You know, it kind of becomes a no-brainer. That's what made us take the steps that we did in creating a guidance, because we want the providers to kind of be on a fair playing field. We want them all to be able to give us what we're looking for. Hence, my answer to this is yes.
John.
There's really nothing to add, like, honestly. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. The best thing that she said right there was like, how could you not? And I think that everybody in our community would understand and accept that. Like, doesn't mean that people and companies can't make mistakes. I mean, my goodness, we're human. But of course, you always, in any kind of industry or any job or any kind of outcome related type of project that you're part of, you always evaluate what served you the best. And so, yes, by all means, that definitely feeds into the decision-making process that we have.
Karen, anything else to add there?
I mean, only that I completely agree, and that this is how we show our value. That's it. So it's absolutely such an important part. Yeah.
So this kind of feeds into the next question too. So are the expectations of outcomes different for different types of organizations? Your medical education companies versus your academic centers versus your associations. Are you looking for different things or expecting different things with the three or other different kinds of groups there? Let's start, Karen. Any difference in expectations?
I'm not sure, like, differences in what way? Differences in terms of the focus? I guess I'm not quite clear on the
difference in quality of the outcomes reports, or maybe the numbers, or are there any differences that you're expecting, or is everybody on the same playing field here?
I mean, I would like to say that they're all on the same playing field. If anything, I would say there are differences in terms of focus. If an association is sort of much more patient focused, then we're sort of looking for that. Academic centers may have be more focused on perhaps statistics MECs will be kind of understand the language of CME better. So I don't know if it's even the quality, but there are differences in the outcomes reports. But the quality though should remain consistent. I don't know.
I agree.
Maria, John.
Karen, I'm so glad that you said that. I think maybe just a perspective. People do not have to agree with me. Many times they don't. I get that. But just a perspective here. It's maybe less about looking at the differences of an institution and, again, centered back on what was the gap. And if the gap is being met by one institution versus another because we all think that that's the appropriate way to meet the gap, the outcome should be the same or should be meeting the expectation of what we thought we were going to support. I don't think that there should be different standards for different institutions and just maybe instead of focusing on that, just again, focus on the gap. What is the gap? How do we meet the gap? How do we measure the gap simply and right to the point? And our expectations would be met.
Maria?
So that sounds great, both Karen and John, but in reality, the academic centers and the associations do not give us the quality of outcomes that we get from the MECs. And is that okay? We have decided that we are going to support the key academic oncology institutions and our associations, and we're going to do it. It's just that they tell us they don't have the resources to be able to put out the outcomes reports that we're looking for. And they are doing the education, but it's the way that they're proving that the education was valuable or that the learning was met, the quality of or the competence and all that was met, but we're just not getting the types of outcomes that we are with the MECs, to be honest.
I have a question, Maria. I just have a quick question, and this kind of relates back to what John said as well. Is it the language? In other words, is it their ability to understand like Moore's levels and what is knowledge and what is competence, or is it, again, getting away from that and focusing more on the gap? So what was their goal? I'm curious if you could talk a little more about it.
I think it's just the quality. So if we do support or when we do support an academic center, what they'll give us back is mostly the numbers and demographics. They don't give us back any kind of bar graphs or pie charts. It's mostly the raw data that we have to go through and kind of make the distinction and the determinations on our own as to the value of the education. They don't have the executive summary that we'd like. It's hard for them to fill out the infographic because they're basing it on their resources. Maybe they don't have a stats department, which most of them probably do not. So that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing, the gaps.
Is it that, and I'm curious because I don't know if this is the case, but is it that some of the larger institutions or academic centers or different large associations don't think they have to get their funding for next year?
That could be it too. That could be it too, because like I said, our charge is that we want to support them, and their grants need to be, their learning objectives need to be medically aligned and strategically aligned with what we're looking to educate on. But I already know that I'm not going to get that quality of outcomes.
But here's where I was, and I agree with everything you just said, Maria, and I agree, Karen, with what you said as well. But here's the opportunity. So just using that as an example, if an academic center is actually the place of care delivery that is being kept up at night, that is treating patients that are going through the gaps that we're trying to address, clearly they're providing some kind of opportunity for education to be used, but we're in a new marketplace. And having come from a medical education company myself, when I was formerly a provider, I know the value that a MEC can provide. And I would never suggest that MECs not be supported. I think there's opportunities for people to try to leverage their skills with one another so that there's a much more profound educational experience. we're in that kind of world now. We're in that kind of marketplace. We can't resist collaboration.
Good point.
That's a great point.
We're out of time, so I'd like to give everybody 20 seconds to just give a final summary. You know, what you're looking for, what you're glad to see, and what you know, just 20 seconds on outcomes. Let's start with Karen. 20 seconds. What do you think? In conclusion.
Oh, you started with me.
Of course.
Don't start with me. I need a couple seconds.
All right, Maria.
I need 40 seconds.
Okay, I love this topic. I think it was fantastic. It was very interesting to hear the perspectives from John and Karen, that we're all on the same page. And I'm just hoping that the providers, when they need any kind of advice or any kind of questions answered, that they reach out as much as they could. So we both get what we need.
John.
I think that Maria, Karen, and Greg are all awesome people. Scott, I'm still not sure about, but I think it's awesome that we put this together. I think that outcomes are essential to showing value. I just really encourage our community, supporter or provider, to just be really smart, simple, methodical, not have to boil the ocean, just address it down.
Thank you. Karen, any last statements?
See, it was a trick because they said everything that I wanted to say. Yeah,
I tried, Karen.
I don't need to say anything except that I enjoyed this so much, and I hope that this discussion continues, that a discussion about standardization of outcomes, about collaboration. I really loved that message as well. When it comes to outcomes, I hope that we continue this. I hope that it doesn't just stop here. So thank you, Greg, for putting this together. It was wonderful.
Absolutely. All right, Scott, back to you.
All right, fantastic. So thank you to everyone who submitted comments and questions. I know we weren't able to get to everything, but I think we got to a lot of good information. So for those of you who are watching this live, if you can, please click on the survey link at the top of the live tab. It's a short survey to give us a sense of who's watching CMEPalooza Spring, get some feedback for our own internal outcomes. If you are watching this live and want to watch the next session, if you can please refresh your browser. We will start that next session here in about 2 minutes. So I would like to thank Greg and John and Karen and Maria for their time, and we will see everyone very soon.
Bye. You're welcome.
Bye-bye.